Okay, now I think we are ready to start with classification of connective tissues. I hope you people are doing really good and really well. Please ensure that you like, share and subscribe to the channel, and also if you like these videos, recommend it to your friends maybe, right? The more the merrier, right? Okay, let's get right into it. Classification of connective tissues. So the connective tissue originates from the embryonic connective tissue, which you also call as mesenchyme. Now mesenchyme could further form any of the three types: connective tissue proper, supportive connective tissues, or fluid connective tissue. Now why do we use the word proper? I couldn't find a definite definition per se, but largely these tissues do not perform any other specialized functions, and they have a matrix which is not which is just the combination of stuff. Like in fluid connective tissue, you'll have blood will have many specialized functions, oxygen carrying, immune system, bones protect you and stuff. But connective tissue proper, they sort of just connect things. Okay, so connective tissue proper could be further classified as loose, and I was confused with the spelling, and dense. Now, what does that mean? What is loose? What's dense? It simply means that the fibers would be few, right? So, few fibers and more ground substance, and they're arranged loosely. Dense means the amount of fiber would be more, right? More ground substance. Now they are further subclassified into different categories, and we are going to deal with each category, don't worry. So you'll hear the word areolar, open spaces, the ones that fills the space between the organs. Adipose, the one beneath your skin which stores all the fat. And reticular, we'll talk about reticular as well. Dense connective proper connective tissues could be regular or irregular. You could also have elastic. Supportive connective tissues, when we'll talk about them, we'll talk about obviously cartilages, and we'll talk about bone. Bone, we'll talk about compact and spongy. Cartilage, we'll talk about hyaline, fibro, and elastic. Now, I'd want to mention a few things here that even though the connective tissue involves bone, involves blood, which we are going to just talk about, will not be dealing with all of the subtypes in detail in this very lecture. The reason being, we haven't we need to cover them up with their respective chapters. For example, blood would be covered in a lot more detail in the circulatory system. Bone would be covered in a lot more detail when we'll be talking about the skeleton system of the body, right? So while we'll be doing a lot of review and understanding here, we'll be leaving a few parts for future lectures. Okay, now when we talk about fluid, you have two types, and those two types are blood and lymph. Right, now that we have done the basic stuff, let's get into the details. Okay, so let's start our discussion with the loose connective tissue. Now, very well, we already remember that loose means the fibers are very less, they are sparse, irregularly arranged, and there is abundant ground substance here, right? So we'll start our discussion with the types of loose connective tissue, and the first one that we are discussing is areolar. Areolar comes from the word open spaces. That means these guys are found in the open spaces. There are no open spaces in our body. That means in between organs, right? So they act sort of as the filling tissue. Now, generally, they would be highly vascularized. Why? Because they need to provide the blood and the things that blood carry, oxygen, food, whatever, into the ECM so that the cells can get the energy and hence, live. Ground substance is abundant and also viscous. So abundant ground substance, and it's pretty viscous enough to wrap the whole things around. Now, because of this abundant ground substance and viscous nature, it sort of cushions the organs and deeper tissues as well. Okay, now usually whenever they try to teach you connective tissues, they come up with this sort of bunch diagram. So if you see the thick fibers here, those are the collagen fibers, and these thin lines are elastic fibers which add to the elasticity of the tissue as whole. Now these big cells that you see are fibroblasts. Their whole job would be to make more fibers and secrete the ECM. And here is the ground substance that we have been talking about. So this is how they generally describe the areola. Now let us go to the next part, that's adipose. So adipose tissue, as you can by the name itself, it stores fat. So this is how a cross section would look like, and this is the plasma membrane, and quite dominantly this would be the lipid droplet, because the job is to store as much fat as possible. Now because of the huge amount that could occupy around 90% of the cell, the nucleus gets pushed to the periphery. Okay, now adipose tissue, yes, it does store fat, but there's another important function that it provides, that is insulation, right? So many animals, as a sort of adaptation, like polar bears that live near the poles, they have to face a lot of cold weather, so they have plenty of this adipose tissue to keep themselves from losing the body heat, right? Now there are two types that we will be talking about of the adipose tissue, and that is the brown and white. Brown is generally found in newborns, and the majority, the big function is that it generates a lot of heat, whereas white, as we grow up into the adult, most of the brown tissue is replaced by the white tissue, and the chief function is long-term energy storage. Besides, it's also work to provide us with the cushioning around a lot of organs and obviously the insulation, right? So with that, we arrive to the last of the loose connective tissue, that will be the reticular connective tissue. Now the reticular word comes from the word meaning network. That means these connective tissues, they generally form network inside lymphoid organs, that would be spleen and even liver. So dense connective tissue, we remember that the reason that we call them dense is because they have less ground substance and more of the cells and the fibers. And they are also called collagenous tissues because they have more of collagen. Now, dense, regular and irregular, there could be two types of these tissues, and the difference is pretty much in their hidden in their names itself. So regular means that here the fibers are arranged in a very regular fashion. Also, these guys have very less cells, more fibers. The fibers are packed really tight here. They're usually found in tendons and ligaments which join different parts of our body. Now, if you have forgotten, then there's very easy way to remember this. That's BTM, button, the button of your shirts. So tendons, they join bones to muscles, whereas we can also have ligaments, and ligaments I remember it via bulb, BLB. It joins a bone to another bone. Pretty easy. But the thing is, you must have heard about a lot of injuries when we talk about ligaments and tendons, right? Especially people who are in sports. The reason is that they do not have a lot of blood vessels. And because of the shortage of that, they take a lot time to heal, right? Now we are going to turn our eye to the next category that we pointed out earlier, that was irregular. Now the word irregular simply means that they are profusely branched into bundles or clumps that extend in all directions. They can provide resistance to stress in upon being pulled and what so and what not. So they very popularly form sheaths, that is protective covering all around different things in the body. For example, you'll talk about these terms later on, but some of the introductory ones are epimysium. Now, mysium, muscle, something that covers a muscle. You'll hear about epineurium, something that covers a nerve. So this is a nerve covering, this is a muscle covering, and we'll also talk about periosteum. Peri, around, osteum, something to do with bone, right? You'll hear about perichondrium, something that wraps around cartilages. So bone covering, cartilage covering, muscle covering, nerve covering. You can get the idea that the chief function of irregular is to just sort of provide protection. Now, last in the function of dense connective tissue is the elastic connective tissue, right? These are the two major kinds, but yes, there is a third kind here that we left out initially, that is elastic. This tissue is characterized by numerous extensively branched fibroblasts with a lot of elastic fibers. They are generally found in the walls of large arteries, in trachea and vocal cords and etc. So connective tissue, supportive connective tissue is basically a sort of durable framework that is supposed to protect you and provide you support for the body. Also, its extracircular matrix, the ECM, could have a lot of protein fibers and ground substances that could be semi-solid, which is the case with cartilage, or it could be solid, which is the case with bone. Okay, so let's start talking about cartilages. So cartilages have a firm, semi-solid ECM. Okay, now this right here is the semi-solid ECM. Now, as you can see, there are white spaces here, right? So these spaces are called lacuna or lacunae, singular plural, and within these lacunae or lacuna, you'll find the cells called chondrocytes. Now, it is these cells that are the major cells of the cartilages, right? Now, obviously, this ECM will have variable amounts of collagen, a lot of collagen, because this is the reason that cartilages are pretty strong. And when you try to plug out your ear, it doesn't come out because cartilage, the tip of your nose, that's cartilage, right? So it's strong, but it's also very flexible. That is what makes it so special. Okay, so because of this flexibility, it allows smoother movement. So if you have taken high school biology, so you know there's intervertebral discs right in your vertebral column. In your backbone, there's intervertebral discs which are made up of the bone. And between this intervertebral disc, you have cartilaginous discs. Now, these discs make it very easy for the bony vertebrae to move upon each other without causing a lot of friction. But the problem here is these chondrocytes, they secrete a chemical, and this chemical inhibits or sort of deregulates the blood vessel formation, right? Now, because the blood vessel formation is inhibited, you can imagine the adult cartilages are avascular, and that again means the same thing as you found in ligaments or tendons, that because it's avascular, it's very difficult to heal, right? And this creates problem because of sports injuries and stuff like that. Now, cartilages are of three types, which we are going to study, and that would be hyaline, fibro, and elastic cartilage. Now, cartilages are actually really interesting. Now, to help you put into perspective as to why, I want you to imagine two things. First, imagine a steel scale, a scale that you use for drawing lines. Imagine that made up of steel, or just anything made up of steel, and imagine holding it down, putting your body weight on it, or sleeping on it. What will happen eventually is going to be deformed, right? Its original shape, if it's a straight thing, it will eventually curve down if you're putting pressure there. Now imagine something else. Average lifespan of a person, 75 years, 360 days in a year. That's how much. Do the math. I'm really poor in math. So 360 days, 75 in times 360, and for each day a person sleeps about, let's say, 6 hours. 6 hours, that's around 1 by 4th, right? If I'm doing this correctly. So these are the number of hours that you are twisting your ears while you are sleeping, right? While you're sleeping on your pillows, you are twisting your ears into all different patterns and whatever. But every morning, when you're looking in the mirror, you find the same beautiful slash ugly ear that you have. Why is that? Isn't it strange? Isn't it amazing to think that your bodies are some of the most capable machines or elements that's out there? So, elastic cartilages, that is what makes your ear so flexible. So, as the name itself suggests, it's very much flexible because it will have a lot of elastic fibers, right? And obviously, there would be some small amount of ECM, right? Because it's not possible without that. Now, other places that it could be found besides external ear, and that would be epiglottis. If you are having a trouble with that, epiglottis is a flap like structure that closes down on your windpipe when you're trying to swallow, right? So that is very much about elastic. Now let's come down to the next category, and that is the fibrocartilages. Now fibrocartilages are better known as the weight bearing cartilages. That means they bear weight, they survive compression because of your body weights. So under the microscope, if you see, you can easily identify them as coarse, that means coarse, rough looking uh, structures with visible protein fibers. So when we go to the hyaline, we'll talk that it's really very much like glass. On the other hand, the fibro one, it could be easily spotted as with a lot of fibrous structure there. Now, because of this woven structure, it can support weights, and that is why they form the intervertebral discs, which we talked about in the beginning of this section, right? And this intervertebral disc takes down the pressure, continuous pressure of you trying to hold your body straight. Okay. Now, that brings us to the very first, and that is hyaline. Hyaline comes from, I don't know what the correct pronunciation is, so I'm just going to go by hyaline. So, guys, quick update, because I was brought up and did everything in India, so my pronunciations would be like that. But if you're watching from somewhere outside of my country, so you'd find some pronunciations a little different, obviously. So pardon me for that. So hyaline cartilages, they provide flexible support. Now, where can you imagine these kinds of structures to be? So you can generally understand them to be in your respiratory tract, ends of long bones. And one of the important fact about hyaline cartilages, you must have heard that our skeleton starts as a cartilaginous skeleton, which eventually undergoes the process of ossification to turn into the bones that we have. But the fetal skeleton, that is all about the hyaline cartilages. Okay. So I hope this makes sense, and we have covered cartilages. And if don't worry about details, we there would be more details when you would be covering the skeleton system. Just like we covered cartilages in brief, we are going to do the same for bones, blood, and the nervous, because all of those would be covered in a lot more detail in their more coherent sections or chapters, I would say. Okay. Now bones. Okay, guys, so now bone. Now, understanding bone would be simple right now, and it's going to get slightly more complicated in the later on lectures. Once again, when we start the discussion in detail, right? So right now, what do we understand? First, let me make one thing clear. When we say bone, a piece of bone, that is an organ. The organ contains bony tissue. So please understand and remember, there are two distinct things. Like when you say house, right? So a house has multiple rooms, right? The room itself makes the house, but the room alone will not make the house. There's gates and there's stuff, right? Follow the same analogy. When you pick a piece of bone, that is an organ, because it has more tissues, it has blood vessels, it has connective tissues, it has nerves. But a major component of the bone piece that you have, that you're holding, would be the bony tissue, right? Now, you can also call them osseous connective tissue, right? Okay. Now, so whenever we talk about any connective tissue, we have to talk about the matrix and the cells. So the cells of the bony tissue, that's called osteocyte, and we are going to talk back and forth about them a lot. But right now, osteocyte is a mature bone cell which is produced as a result of cell division and then differentiation. So you have osteogenic stem cells which give you osteocytes. You have another types of cells, osteoblasts, which are one of the stages during the formation of osteocytes. You have osteoclasts, which are bone dissolving cells. So their purpose is to break the matrix, dissolve stuff, right? And we'll talk about them in details a lot. But these osteocytes are once again held in ECM, the space in the extracellular matrix called lacuna, just like we had for cartilages. Okay, so that's one component of the bone tissue, the osteocytes. Now, the second thing, obviously, you have to talk about matrix. What is a matrix made up of? Now, in this case, there's a lot of collagen fibers. That is what makes the bone very strong, right? There is a lot of glycoproteins. Remember the difference between proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Glycoproteins are proteins which have carbohydrate attached to them. But there's also a lot of solid ground substance here that we will be talking about, and the solid ground substance would compose a lot of calcium salts, and one of the calcium salt you have to know is calcium phosphate, Ca3PO4 whole choice. If I'm good in chemistry, then that's it, right? Now, when we talk about bones, we also talk about the two types of bones, and all of this would be covered in a lot more detail. Don't worry about it right now. Okay, so if you pick a piece of bone, so just for representational purposes, picking this piece of bone, so on the outer end, if you're talking about, let me draw it like this. So on the outer end or towards the periphery, the bone is called compact bone. Okay, so that's called compact bone because it's less porous, you can say. And on the inside we have spongy bone. So these are made up of networks and all of that, and we'll get into the details, right? So there's a compact bone and there is the spongy bone. Now, the compact bone is very marked feature that's in compact bone is the circular arrangement pattern. So that means if you take a plane, cut a cross section of it. So this would be the, the middle empty portion of the bone, not empty, but you'll have the marrow here. Marrow is a tissue here which would have stem cells to make new blood, and not here, it's actually in the spongy bone, but yes, that's filled. It's not completely empty. In birds it's empty, right? And the surrounding areas obviously would be a lot of the spongy bone stuff, right? And further, the area would be the compact bone. Now in compact bone, you'll have the concentric circular arrangement of osteocytes. Now each of these concentric arrangements is called osteons. We are going to go into depth of osteons, just not right now, but if you zoom in one osteon, so what you'll see that there's a central canal. This central canal is going to carry the blood vessels, which will bring blood to the cells obviously, and it will also carry nerves. So that's why you feel pain when you break a bone. And around the central canal you have the concentric arrangement of the matrix. This concentric arrangement is called something lamella, and in these concentric arrangements you have the lacuna, and within these lacuna you have the osteocytes sitting right in the middle, right? And don't worry about this, is just a generic, very generic description, and we have to go in a lot of detail later on. Okay, now yes, what's the function of bone? Obviously they are going to protect you from injuries. They are going to support you. You stand, you sit because of bones, but they are also a storehouse of calcium. And when we'll be talking about evolution, this would come out to be a very important discussion, because why is calcium important? We'll come to know later on that it is very important for neurons to talk to each other. So the communication between two neurons, calcium plays a very important role, and you can relate right now that one would never want to lose that, because if we have too much of influx, too much of changes in the blood, the calcium level, that means the communication channels are jammed, and that means you can't move efficiently, you can't eat, you can't predate, and that simply means no life for animals, right? So that's why the evolution of bones, the ossification of cartilages to bone, is a very, very bold evolutionary step. It's an innovation. So whenever you have a look at your MacBook or iPad or anything mechanical, and then you shout out of joy that whoa, it can shoot 108 megapixels or 100 times zooms or whatever. Imagine nature doing such perfection steps. Nothing compared, and this stands out. I mean, whatever we humans create and we shout out about it, that yes, we have done so much, and then we look at the history of life and we see, well, we started as a single cell and now we have this complicated body. So yeah, another important point that we'll talk about once again in a lot more detail is hematopoiesis. And pardon me if I do not spell it correctly. I'm trying to. I think it's Poiesis. So poiesis means to make, hemato means blood cells. Now, later on in the next lecture to come, I think, will be talk about potencies, the power of cells to divide and give rise to other kinds of cells. So hematopoiesis is multipotent cells. There's totipotent, pluripotent, multipotent, and unipotent. So hematopoietic stem cells that are present in the marrow cavity of bones are multipotent. They can form a lot of different types of blood. In fact, all of blood cell types are made in bones, and that is why they're pretty important to us. Now, the last connective tissue that we are going to deal with today is obviously the fluid connective tissue, and that is blood and how the blood forms lymph. Right, once again, this is going to be a very generic description. The reason being, we have to study these in lot more detail. Okay, so what is blood? Blood is a fluid connective tissue. You cut your hand by mistake or by playing football, you come home, you get 2 slaps from mom, and then you're like, okay, I'll do that, but after a month. So what's blood? That's where blood comes out, right? So blood is a fluid, right? And the best way that we started studying blood was by rotating it at high speed. So we centrifuge it. So you rotate things at high speeds. This is how you make the makhan, right? You put the milk in a round thing. Traditionally, this is how you used to make makhan. Obviously, now we have big centrifuge for that. You put milk in a round box and then you insert. So this is okay. I forget that I need to keep on drawing, so that it helps you understand. So then you have this dandi, and then you try to rope. You push and you pull and you keep on doing this, and eventually makhan keeps on coming out on the surface, right? So you do the same thing with blood. Isn't it crazy, huh? So what happens when you do that? You get 2 parts. So the fluid part is called plasma, and the other part is we can't say cellular part, but for some reason, we can say the cellular part. Now, what is plasma? Plasma is, I guess, 95 or 99%. It's mostly water. So I'll just write, 95% it's water. But what else? It has, it's water, right? So there will be some gases dissolved, very less oxygen, carbon dioxide. But I don't want you to mistake that plasma is carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide for your body. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are just there because water, being a universal solvent thanks to hydrogen bonding, they are gases which are poorly soluble in water, but it's just there because of that solubility reason. They are not the chief carriers. We'll talk about the chief carriers being RBC, red blood cells. Okay. Now, what else? Well, you ate something sugary. So glucose is going to carry glucose. It's going to carry your waste material. That's urea. It's going to carry, your secret messages. So you see your crush and, you're all getting lovey-dovey. So that's hormones, talking to your body that, yes, this is a time perhaps when you should show yourself out, or, you see a snake and you should run. So your heart needs to, beat faster. So how does your heart know to do that? So, they're hormones. They communicate via blood. What else? There's a lot of proteins, and one of the important proteins are antibodies. What are antibodies? They are proteins, soldiers of your body, produced by one of your WBCs, white blood cells. They fight, right? So COVID vaccines we talk about. So why do we take vaccines? Because our immune system should recognize that vaccine and prepare an army of these antibodies, which would prevent more infections and sort of try to kill the virus. We'll have a detailed discussion on how antibodies work, and there's more than one way how they work. Now, what else could be there in the plasma? So I think we covered mostly. So salts, obviously. So there's salts, right? And remember, plasma is a continua. It's not fixed, right? So cells keep on giving stuff into the ECM, the extracellular matrix, and things from there pass on to the blood, and from blood passes on to the ECM. Now, there's one thing I want to make it clear very much. Blood does not surround the cell, okay? So imagine this is your blood capillary, the finest blood vessel. The blood cells, very few blood cell types can come out of this capillary, right? So what comes out? The plasma, right? So plasma sort of leaks out, right? And this is where your cells are, right? This is your cells are, and this whole thing surrounding is the ECM. So from here comes to there and comes to there, and vice versa, right? But you will imagine that the amount of blood in your body is fixed. And if this blood keeps on leaking out, all is gone, done. So what, are we making new blood like that? No, we are smarter than that. Evolution, mother nature is smarter than that. You collect all these leaked out plasmas, and that is what you call as lymph. This lymph is sampling the entire body in a way. Sampling means it's carrying the molecules from different cells, and some of those could be, antigens, the rubbed surface of a bacteria or something, and then it gets via the police stations of your body, the lymph nodes. We'll talk about them as well. I know I have been saying a lot. We'll talk about. The reason I'm doing that is because this is just the beginning, right? I started with human anatomy and physiology. So this is a beginning, and you need to, hold on to your horses a little bit. So they go on to the lymph nodes, and there they are, inspected. And if something is fishy, they're mounted an attack on. But eventually they go and drain into the veins, and that means returning to the blood circulation. So all the leaked out plasma enters and again rejoins the blood vascular system. And in between, while they are in the lymph vessels, or capillaries or anything like associated with that, we call them lymph. So that is lymph. Obviously this will be dealt in detail. Now, we need to talk about the cellular part. Once again, I'm saying we'll be very brief because we have to redo them in great details. RBC, erythrocytes. Erythrocytes, what's the function? Well, it has the hemoglobin protein, which is going to carry 4 oxygen over molecules, right? So RBCs are majorly just, they are anucleated, no nucleus, right? So that's there to make space for enough hemoglobin, right? Then you have WBCs, white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. I always forget, is it K or C? Anyway, leukocytes, the job is to protect your body from different things. They can be further classified depending upon how they were seen under the microscope. So we have granulocytes and agranulocytes. So if we have granulocytes, that means they appeared granular. Their cytoplasm is filled with granules, and they could further be divided into neutrophil, eosinophil, and basophil. And don't worry, we'll talk about each of them. Agranulocytes could be again divided into monocytes and lymphocytes. Okay, so we're going to have to do a detailed discussion of each of these, right? And I think for some exams you also need to remember which one is more. So you have this thing: never let monkeys eat bananas. So neutrophils are the most. Then you have the what's L? Lymphocytes. Monkeys, monocytes eat eosinophils, then basophils, right? So it's a cool acronym. I think Mari Van Hoon's Anatomy and Physiology. I read this there, so it's pretty cool. And then, so WBCs are, by the way, the only cells which have nuclei. Sometimes they have, nuclei shaped like telephones or something, but we can forgive them that. At least they have one, right? Then we come to platelets. Now, platelets are not exactly cells, right? But yes, they come by the name thrombocytes, right? What do? They plug the breaks, right? So if your blood vessels or something breaks apart, they keep on plugging that. That means no more blood leakage or something like that. Okay. Yeah, I also they are not whole cells. Remember that they're not whole cell. They are cell fragments. So later on, I'll teach you about megakaryocytes, and they are fragments of megakaryocytes. Okay, so this is all about blood and lymph. I think we have been going for this video for lengths of time, but there's just to redo because it's a very Okay, I'm going to stop myself here because I just sort of remember that we have muscular tissue as well pending. So what we'll do is we'll bring another video. We'll talk all about muscular tissue and nervous tissue, two tissues done really quickly. And then we'll start the future things, right? So guys, this is for me today, I guess. This is me today. Thank you so much for joining. And if you like reading with me, please recommend this channel to your friends and share the videos. Take notes, ask questions. Sona Singh Biology, that's how you reach me. The links are in the description already. And I think, use the tracker to, check the past videos. And I think I'll be able to upload these scribblings as well. So, yeah, thank you so much. Bye bye. Happy studying. Take care.